Folks, join us here this afternoon is Mr. Nick Kovacevich. He's the CEO of KushCo Holdings. It is indeed the country's largest marijuana ancillary products company. Nick, how are you? Welcome to Liquid Lunch.
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, listen, it's my pleasure. And Nick, this is an issue that I think is really personal to someone like myself, because before entering academia, I worked in the criminal justice system in New Jersey for 10 years. So I worked in jails. I worked with, disproportional populations, right? Black and brown people that continue to get incarcerated for low-level marijuana offenses. So, coming up, we have some referendums in Arizona, my home state, New Jersey, Montana, and South Dakota to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. Let's be honest, this could very well have a very big impact on liberal turnout in those states coming up on November 3rd. How do you see this issue?
Well, I think you hit on the head. Right, this year, 2020, has been a year of many things, and one of them is certainly a cry for criminal justice reform, racial reform here in the country. And I don't think you can talk about criminal justice reform without talking about cannabis legalization, because as you mentioned, people are getting arrested still in much too high of numbers for these nonviolent crimes. It's using resources that could be going elsewhere. I mean, cannabis arrests are down overall because of legalization in many states, but still more people arrested for cannabis than all of the violent crimes combined. And we got to change that. And this is the opportunity. So New Jersey has a huge opportunity, Arizona, Montana, South Dakota, as you mentioned, and voters are going to turn out. This is a very popular issue, actually, amongst Republican voters and Democrat voters. High support numbers, as high as 70% on average between the two, but well over 50% for Republican voters. So this is something that's going to show, support. It's going to show turnout. And quite frankly, President Trump suggested to states to not allow cannabis on the ballot because it does increase the amount of voter turnout, and in a lot of cases creates a scenario where there's more Democratic voters voting for the presidential election as well, because this is an issue that they actually do care about and they think could see immediate impact and change in their communities.
Absolutely, Nick. And one of the things that really stands out for me about this issue specifically, and I've talked about it on my other media programs, I mean, I don't really have a dog in this fight per se. Like, I don't smoke marijuana. I never have. I don't care to. But I also don't feel that these punitive laws against, let's be honest, black and brown people get arrested at much larger rates. And it's interesting because their white counterparts, according to the data, smoke it comparably at the same rate. So again, listen, there's this outcry for criminal justice reform and prison reform when it comes to marijuana laws. But this is something that really, I think your company is trying to lead the charge on and trying to raise awareness. We know it's difficult during COVID-19. You can't have rallies, you can't have sort of town hall events or, conventions about this, where normally you could be able to talk to people and network and get people involved. How challenging has it been for you and your company to continue raising awareness? Because even though these referendums are on the ballot, it's still something that people have to be made aware of. What are some of the challenges you had to overcome here this year?
Yeah, it's been a different year, right? We have to think of everything that we're doing differently. I was on a panel, I think earlier this week, with former House Speaker John Boehner, who has become a cannabis advocate, even though, similar to you, he doesn't use the product, but believes that people should have the freedom to make the choice, and believes that the total social macro impact is going to be positive via a legalization initiative. So, we were on a Zoom panel speaking to, hundreds of people, and that link is also getting circulated to thousands more. So you got to do things like that to get out there. We are close to announcing a bigger partnership, and we've announced that we are working closely with Mission Green. And this is a phenomenal organization started by an individual who was personally impacted by this war on drugs. He was a young, entrepreneur out of LA, working with, rappers like Snoop Dogg and Tupac, and it wasn't paying the bill. So he was selling a little bit of marijuana on the side, got caught selling less than $1,000 to a federal agent. It happened on multiple occasions. He happened to have a firearm, which was never, used, but it happened to be on him. And because you add those up, even though it was less than $1,000 a pot, he got sentenced to 55 years in prison. And the judge that gave it to him even said, this sentence doesn't appear to fit the crime, but I'm mandated to give it. And it was a fascinating story. There's a documentary coming out, but the long story short, through heroic bipartisan efforts, this individual, Weldon, was able to get out of jail after 13 years, returned to his kids. And, he was very fortunate, had the opportunity to restart his life, but thought to himself, I'd be doing the world a disservice if I didn't take my platform and my connections that I now have politically to work to get everybody else out of prison that's in there for cannabis. And he's actually been working with the Trump administration and starting with people that are in prison in states that are now legal. Just think about that. Imagine you're sitting in jail because you had an ounce of cannabis, and the state that you were arrested in, now people are selling an ounce of cannabis on every corner completely legally. And it would be so frustrating. So that's the low-hanging fruit. We start there, and then we expand. And there's a more progressive measure now in the House called the MORE Act, which would be complete legalization federally, expungement of many low-level criminal offenses for marijuana. And that's something that's got major traction and support in the House and could be voted on later this year. So you're seeing it across the board. And the last thing I'll say is, when you look at gay marriage, this is an issue that first passed in Massachusetts in 2004, finally became federally legal in 2014. You look at cannabis, well, Colorado voted in 2012, implemented it in 2014. So we're coming up on that same 10-year horizon between the first state legalizing for adult use and it becoming federally legal. So watch out. There should be significant traction on this issue at the federal level here in the next couple of years.
We mentioned traction, and we know that marijuana has always been sort of a favorite talking point for many that are identify as progressives, but I'm seeing more and more people that identify as center-right, libertarians, even some conservatives too, have been very open and honest in saying, listen, marijuana laws have been overly punitive for people for decades now, and it seems that, this is something we have to address, in state legislatures and even at the federal level. How do you see this transition moving in the next few years?
Yeah, well, I think, it's interesting because cannabis, it really stands out. It's been put on the schedule list as of 1970 when the Controlled Substance Act was created as a Schedule I drug. And that's the worst schedule. It means it basically has a high potential for addiction and zero medicinal benefit. And you look at Schedule II drugs, cocaine, methamphetamines, both at Schedule II, deemed to have some medicinal benefit, but still being highly addictive. So you have something that's totally out of whack. It's not like it's just placed, slightly worse than it should be. I mean, it is placed as the worst possible drug when really we're finding out it's probably the least harmful drug that's out there. No one's ever even died from cannabis consumption. So it's something that's caught a lot of attention. And now the own federal government, which has placed it as a Schedule I, saying it has no medicinal value, has approved a patent for a company that makes an epilepsy drug based on cannabis. And that patent was approved by the FDA. So you have one branch of the government saying there is medicinal value, yet the DEA, who controls the schedule list, still has it in a category saying it has no medicinal value. So that contradiction is really coming to light, and people are speaking out on it. So I think we are going to see the momentum. Combine that with some of the stuff that we have on how cannabis is impacting people of color. I mean, Black people specifically are, as you mentioned, have same usage rates as white people, but are getting arrested on average 3.5 times more likely. And you look at a state like Kentucky that, has draconian laws, that number's as high as 10 times more likely. So you combine all these things together, and the growing call for change here is getting louder and louder. And I think it all comes down to November. We have a historic election on many fronts, but you could see a change in the Senate, where the Senate turns blue. And Senate Leader McConnell, it's no secret, he's been against cannabis reform. So if he were to be replaced with a Schumer or pro-democratic leader, pro-cannabis leader, this is opens up a whole lane for cannabis legislation to pass through. And then, of course, we got the presidential election, and
absolutely,
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Nick, listen, a wealth of information today by you again, folks. Nick Kovacevich, the CEO of KushCo Holdings, the country's largest marijuana ancillary products company. You definitely want to Google it and check him out. Nick, thank you so much for joining us here today on Liquid Lunch, and very informative to say the least. And hopefully we're changing some minds in 2020.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate the platform. Let's keep getting the word out. Let's stay tuned because there's a lot happening. I'd love to be back on shortly after some of these events unfold.
We'll definitely get you back on. Thanks so much. Stay healthy, and thanks for joining us here today.
All right, you do the same. Cheers.